call the meeting to order. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to our second Battery Energy Storage System Steering Committee meeting. We met last month and, let's see, on April 22nd, and just had preliminary review. We heard from the Planning Division that they proposed that we eliminate the storage systems in the residential zones, and we talked about what that would look like. We looked at some maps that they had prepared, and limiting it to industrial zones, but then there'll need to be setbacks so that we're not too close to residences or schools. We talked about exploring caps on the sizes, and we heard from a representative of NYSERDA, who updated us on the governor's interagency task force, and then a representative from the Long Island Power Authority. And we're hoping that they would be, or their designees would be with us today to answer some additional questions. We'll see if they arrive soon. In the meantime, on the agenda, we have some code review. So Janice, would you like to, each have a copy of the zoning code.
Sure. Thank you. So we figured instead of just being like, hi, here's the new code, like better to just dissect it and then rebuild it, right? So we should rip it apart and then put it back together.
Mhm.
That's usually how we go about it. So instead of giving you a updated code, we gave you just the code as it exists today that the moratorium is related to, and then we can just kind of move on from there. So let's just start
Okay.
from the beginning and just go through it, if that's okay with you.
Can I ask you a question before the beginning?
You sure can.
The question that keeps coming up time and time again is this in excess of 600 kilowatt hours. Now, what is that in relation to? We've had a 1 megawatt system, we've had a 5 megawatt system, we've had a 100 megawatt system. Right. They would all fall into this same category.
So the residential battery storage, where you're just a house and you're putting a Tesla battery in your basement, that goes up by state code to 80 kilowatts. So it's 1 to 80 kilowatt hours. Then it goes 80. Seth is better at this part. It's
Sure.
80. Go ahead, Seth.
Yeah, there's multiple tiers. I think in the FDNY, each one kind of has different ones. You can see, generally speaking, a tiered system for lithium ion is from 2 to 20, 20 to 2.
No, but I mean, right now in the building code, it goes from 1 to 80 is residential.
Right.
Then from excess of 80, we
To
had
600.
to 600 is
600.
another tier, and that was a model code from NYSERDA.
That's a medium.
And then
Small
600 and
commercial.
above was a special exception through the planning board. And that we talked about, I'm sorry, Seth. So
No,
then we
no.
talked about having a limitation there and putting, we asked our attendees last time, where's that upper threshold? Is it 100 megawatt? Is it whatever? And they said once you get to 25, that
25
office,
megawatts.
25 megawatt,
Okay.
Office of Renewable Energy Siting kicks in, and the review is like a public service commission review. It's almost out of our hands, but
But that's only if it's attached to a renewable energy.
right, the solar.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if 25 and above is reviewed by ORES, and any battery that's attached to a renewable generating system is going to be also looked at there. But they had a threshold of 25 and above, and any projects like a wind farm that has a battery is also going to be looked at by them.
But they can't supersede local zoning unless it's attached to a
That-
renewable energy project.
I did hear them say that. I
Okay.
heard him say that, but we can confirm that.
Okay.
So
It
let's
needs to be
write that down
confirmed,
as
yes.
needing confirmation. But my notes say generation and storage, like you were saying.
Okay.
So, and it said connected to solar wind was ORES, Office
Yes.
of Renewable Energy Siting, because that's like, you're generating energy and you're storing energy.
Yes.
So, 80, so my notes from last time, from when we had Gary Stevenson here, it said 80 was residential, 600 was small commercial, and then it jumps up from there. So FDNY has 500 kilowatts. We had 600 because that was the model code from NYSERDA. So that could be something we determine here. Do you want to do anything in, that first limitation there is now 500, just to be consistent?
I honestly, I don't understand the scale, size difference.
Well, 1 megawatt is 1,000 kilowatts.
Yeah.
So this is under 1,000 kilowatts, 600. So we can say, we could just go from 1 megawatt. And so we're all talking in this, that we're not 600 kilowatt hours, is it AC, is it DC? Like, maybe we don't care. Maybe we just go 1 megawatt to 5 megawatt, 5 to 10, and 10 and above. We don't, you know what I mean? Like, excuse me. I don't know how you want to tier it, but I think that's up to this group to tier it.
And I just want to know if it's worth it, which I think it kind of is, so that we tier it, so that we're treating them overall the same, but different in terms of, we're not treating a 100 megawatt system the same as a 1 megawatt.
That's right. I agree with that 100%. And so we have 600 kilowatt hours. We could just start saying 1 megawatt. From 1 megawatt to 5 megawatt. And remember, we were talking to Gary last time, and he was saying they want all different kinds, a diversity of them. The one in Montauk and the one in East Hampton were 5s. So, 5 is seems to be one number, right, Seth?
Yes.
Yeah. And then going to 10, maybe 5 to 10. And let me just say this, in our experience with, like cell towers, let's say, we created different tiers for different reviews and made it easier review for the smaller towers, so to encourage people to do smaller towers, because it was an easier review process. So if you only want like less than 5 or 2 megawatt, whatever the number we land on is, make that a process that's not as painful as someone who would come in for 20 megawatt or, something like that. So you could tier it that way, and maybe a very big project only goes to the town board. Maybe a small, only these sizes go through the planning board, and only this larger threshold has to come to the legislative body.
Did the 1 to 80 even have to go to a board?
No, the 1 to 80 is just the
Small
fire code.
residential.
Yeah, small residential.
Literally a car
Yeah,
is,
yeah, no.
a car battery, the wall-mounted car batteries that some residents would have in there, that's an 80, that goes up to 80. That's why, that's the break.
They get building permits and
Because I
electrical
think my
permits.
question
It's-
is to Ryan is, because we are a municipality that has enormous estates, right? So I could see one of these estates as home generators change over from propane or oil to electric. Would they need a megawatt of generation for to power their estate? And what is that set back on if they have a 10-acre property themselves?
Right, I could definitely see the possibility of this technology taking the place of some
Propane.
traditional propane or diesel fired generators to have the storage just on site, ready to go, knowing that will get you, 10 days, 5 days, whatever it is, based on the size and the consumption rate of storage for your property. The same way there was conversation at the last meeting about, certain larger business enterprises potentially even wanting to have, 1 megawatt of storage or whatever it is for, you could look at the same thing happening at like a mall or a strip mall or something like that, where it was enough backup power to sustain for 36 hours or something like that for the structures that are involved with it. It's the concept is not any different than the generator concept. It's just different technology. So,
But I think too, though, and that, because the one thing that was brought up is that we're basically zoning for a potential fire hazard, right? We're zoning
At the large scale.
yes. So even though 1 megawatt would have to have sufficient setbacks
right.
from the resident that it's powering. So you know what I mean? Like, I just don't know how we were, and we still need the firefighting capabilities. And then if you're doing a 1 megawatt at a residential, then you don't have the on-call person, or do you still have to have that through the company that installs the generator? You know what I
be
mean?
fair,
Like,
we're
there's
not-
all these questions.
Yeah.
Residential is still limited to 80 right now, and you're not, and if we take residential out, you couldn't even do 1 megawatt there.
And residential seems to me to be more dangerous
Yeah.
because the batteries are built differently also, and certainly not regulated as much as what we're talking about zoning for. So the danger is more with the residential and the smaller than what we're actually talking about.
So-
But
This-
I
And
think
that's something we don't even touch right now.
But I think you bring up a good point with, especially go into this, we have to look at this globally, right? It's not just smaller properties in like a dense area. It could also be very, very, very large scale properties that might be suited to actually have almost a commercial grade. Like we have residential properties within the town that have, you know, like commercial type elevator systems in them and parking areas underneath and stuff like that. So
Your car lifts
the
inside
concept
garages.
of having a commercial grade battery energy storage on a residential lot should be something that we at least look at for some of the larger properties as well. And maybe when we work the code out, you know, maybe we need to make some sort of an allocation for that, where if the lot size exceeds X amount, it could potentially be eligible for review for a small scale commercial application versus some of the other ones, right? We don't necessarily want to put a 1 meg facility on a quarter acre lot, you know, where it's
Oh, I'm
right up
talking
in,
about like
you
a
know,
10-acre
but-
estate,
Yeah,
you
but
know?
if you have a 10-acre estate, that's something that you might want to consider. You know, it's worth looking at, I think.
But you're
Yeah.
talking about the fire safety end of it as well. Not only that goes along with that, knowing these estates as we do, people are worried about aesthetics and how it looks and everything else. So now you're looking at the aesthetics, the accessibility and everything else for the individual fire departments to gain access to. So again, you're looking at location within the property itself.
Well, right now, it's, the question is, what is the largest size battery required for an estate scale property? But for commercial, you know, it's somewhere between 80 and 600 kilowatts.
What does our code have now for that
Residential
size?
caps out at 80.
Yeah,
80.
but
80 is
what
it.
if somebody wants to put something in between 80 and 600?
Right now they can't,
That's
right?
not part of this code.
They're really not able to for their own private
And I'm
use.
fine with setting that aside for now, because it's not a question that we're faced with right now, and I think battery technologies are going to change. I just read something the other day about sodium batteries that really have no fire hazard
Yeah.
associated with them. So I think that's something we can, but it's just something that I wanted to bring up because,
It's coming.
yeah, and
sure.
we're in a unique situation where we have these huge properties that are residential. But
Right,
if
so
you're
right
keeping
now-
it on your own property and you're maintaining the distances from your neighbors,
They're doing it now, and it's a Tesla battery wall in the basement. Less than 80 kilowatts. That's
Or the
what's-
garage.
Or the garage.
you know.
With the garage, they need like bollards and all these other things. So they are there, but this code is about commercial scale, meaning that you're storing or releasing, discharging energy into the grid itself. You're not just dealing with your own house and islanding off and just kind of running on your own power. You're like injecting this into the grid, and that's what this is. And so we have it at 600 kilowatt hours. FDNY has it at 500 kilowatt hours. We can just, do some more digging and research and find out if we should either go to 500 or just round it off to 1 megawatt. This is just easier to talk in megawatts sometimes. But I have no preference. Whatever everyone thinks is
I think
the right
it's,
answer.
I think it's in every, I think we keep it, for right now, we keep it what it is, but if we can speak over 1 megawatt, because I think when you jump back and forth from kilowatts to megawatts, people get confused.
Yeah, I think it's best to talk in just general terms. Megawatt, 1 megawatt, 1
Like
to
everybody
5,
knows
5 to
East
10.
Hampton was
It should be
5,
0.5
they know the canal
Right,
one was
that's what-
100,
that's-
and
yeah,
it's
that's
like,
what you
it's
said.
numbers
Yeah.
people
0.5
can.
megawatt.
Yeah.
It would be the same
Function.
So
thing.
that sounds good, and we'll find out more about that. So that's before we even jump in, so that was before A. So then, we're-
But just, we may want to look at like an exception in this code to account for large residential lots that can accommodate commercial scale that are above 80.
But
The only
we
thing I
also
would-
want to keep them under 600.
We
Yeah.
also have HERS
I
ratings on
don't
these
know,
homes.
you
So
know.
these homes are generating power for themselves also because of the size of
And the
them. They have
solar.
HERS, so they have solar, so they may not need more than 80. We don't know. But we can actually find out because we have.
That's
all
where
this.
LIPA would
Yeah.
be able to contribute maybe more to this on like the consumption side, you know?
Yeah.
Is that a possibility that somebody would need that?
Right, and the newer
It's-
homes are much more efficient, and they are required to build to HERS standard. They have to have the blower door test, the insulation, and to get to those HERS ratings, they need to, and especially with the stretch code, they need to provide solar most of the time in order to get there. So, I'm not sure that they are
Yeah.
consuming that much.
But we have a lot of
They're
a lot of
generating.
older homes that are large in scale on properties that didn't, maybe don't have the solar capacity,
Right.
so.
Right.
And
Okay,
you could limit it, and it would just be, it would potentially limit what they could power within the home, right? The same way you can have the same thing with a regular generator now, where it doesn't necessarily do whole house generation, but it does essential equipment or something like that.
But then
So-
again, if you don't have solar to generate the power, then are you really gonna be using the battery as a backup generator because you have no way to fill the tank once it runs out?
you
True-
could actually
true,
run,
but the
charge it
same
off the
concept
grid.
You
holds.
charge it off the grid when
charge it
the,
off
when
the
the
grid.
rates are low.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is if you're using it in the event of a power outage, right? There's a hurricane
Right,
and your
right.
power's out. If you have a battery but you have no solar, once your batteries are depleted, you're done.
Right, but if you have a battery that's big enough to potentially, based on whatever the consumption of the property is, to last for, say, 36 hours, you may say, I'm going to go with this. I'm going to assume that the power is going to be back on in, 3 days. I'm going to go with this because it's quiet. I don't have any, emissions coming off of it. I don't have to worry about any of that. It's just stored energy on property.
There are people right now that charge their battery, their home battery, while the grid is low priced.
Right.
And then switch the box over and use that battery while it's high priced.
And
They're
that's
doing it-
very
they're
smart
doing it
to do
right
that.
now. Yeah.
That's incredibly smart, especially if you can't have solar because you have shade or other circumstances like that you couldn't put solar. Okay, so we're still on A. Sure. Hi, George.
I know we're kind of, are we aware of any industrial installations up to 600 kilowatt hours in the towns yet? I'm not aware of any. Have we had any of those yet?
No, because we placed a moratorium on the code before we got anyone.
Between 80 and 600, though?
Before we placed moratorium.
Oh, no, I'm not aware of any over 80.
But I think, we're talking about battery storage of that size, between 80 and 160, or 80 to 600 or megawatt, whatever the threshold we're going to put in this, as strictly a backup storage unit, or strictly as a backup storage instead of a generator. But there is another way that these operate when they're installed in other states, where they're actively used to feed back into the grid during high peak
Like you were just saying.
periods, when instead of having brownouts, and they can also contribute to, reducing brownouts or reducing demand at high peak. So for example, in the afternoon on a, hot summer day, instead of being connected to the grid and drawing power for air conditioning, they can then switch to the battery storage and kind of reduce their demand of the grid. So it doesn't necessarily have to be strictly power storage for, in case power
Right.
goes away. It could be an active spontaneous
Load shedding.
which can feed into the grid or power the house or the business for a couple hours in the morning when demand is high, and a few hours in the afternoon when it's low, and then recharge at night when the demand is. So it could be almost an active system feeding
Yeah.
into the grid as well.
Yeah, it's the same load shedding concept that exists now with a lot of generators with like the hospital. The hospital will shed load at different times during high consumption periods and switch over purposely to generator power so that it's less of a draw on the system.
Yeah, and they use like chillers and stuff, their
Yeah.
refrigeration, yeah.
I would just, but, sorry, George.
Every, office or, storefront, we can actually, every little bit helps. It takes that load off the peak, which is what life is really trying to achieve.
I would just keep us on track with utility scale, because the multiple tiers, we can get down into the weeds on the small things. But we are focused on utility scale. We're gonna maybe think of that as 25 megawatts and above, or 10 to 25. But if we start thinking about every tiered layer, many of the codes that we're thinking about won't really apply to 600 to 1 meg. I can't imagine they're gonna do inspections every year and have monitoring systems, et cetera, et cetera. So some of these recommendations from the interagency task force, they're more focused on the bigger scale projects. But by tiering, perhaps we can grab code that's specific to the utility scale, and we can also contemplate different codes for smaller scale projects. That way, they're not all grouped into 600 and to infinitum.
Yeah, good
So-
point. So then 5A, let's just start with the beginning. It says applications for the installation of battery energy storage systems with an aggregate capacity greater than 600 kilowatt hours shall be reviewed by the planning board, and then goes on, and the rest are the special exception standards. What we were thinking here and what we've been talking about is maybe you're saying planning board oversight is, you know, we could have different tiering, like it's a site plan for 600 to 5, and, or, you know, where are we in the feeling that the board, you know, at some point it's permitted, and you go get a permit, and then at some point it's not permitted unless you meet the criteria of a special exception. So just to get, you know, so do we need to apply the special criteria for things under, you know, under 1? Probably not. Right, that would be something that you could just get a site plan approval. Like, say you're a business, say we say business zones are okay, you're a supermarket, you are doing less than 1 megawatt just to offset your load. Is that a special exception, or is that just, you know, a site plan thing? You know, that's what the kind of question I'm asking. And then if we go from 1 to 5, it's one set of criteria. Now you get bigger in size, there's more to consider, and then even bigger is something else entirely. So, like, I'm just trying to find like those points. 1 to 5, 5 to 10. You know, it just seems I'm rounding off here. I'm not.
I don't know,
you
the first one we started with was 100, so.
Well, right. So and anything over 25 comes to you, the town board. That's what I'm suggesting. You can decide.
Over
whether-
25 comes to the town board.
or over 20 maybe. 25, you know, with
We
solar
can develop
goes to.
that tiering system, but I
Yeah.
think, the upper level, it seems like the planning board needs the assistance of the town board when they get to the scale, the 100, the size of the 100
Well,
watt,
that was their whole thing, like,
megawatt
why
ones.
aren't you involved? Why can't you?
Right,
do that?
I would recommend that doesn't happen until you had some designation that the board approves on the site, like that floating zone, you've landed on the site to allow it. So we can do a parallel code that is for the big, if you even want big. You know, we were talking last time of like,
Can it
Gary
be- can it
Stevenson was
be-
kind of like, we need
can
some
it-
5s, maybe a few of these.
Yeah.
Like, we didn't seem to need, like, they need 750 megawatt for the whole Long Island. We don't have to have it all here,
Exactly.
but we can have some.
Can you do it where it's its own zone and they come to the board for a change of zone?
Well, you could, but if you want it to happen, you should make the, when you're talking about large scale, yes. But if you're talking about 5 megawatt, if you want
I'm talking about
renewable
this over
energy.
20 or over
Over
25.
20?
I think they should have to come to the town board for a change of zone, because I don't really feel like,
That's what I'm talking about, the floating zone designation, so you would ask, they would be asking for some kind of energy overlay that you then approve. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like any other floating
but I think
zone.
people they want to know too, that it, even though it's a floating zone, it's still not going in residential. But I
Yes.
understand what you were talking about. There are, and this is what I was trying to explain to people, there are, in some cases, residential properties that are old sand mines, for instance.
Right.
That the underlining zoning is residential, where it's down in a hole in a pit, where it makes sense to me, that's where maybe it should be, because it's the most defensible place to put one of these things. So yeah, I mean, I think the change of zone to the town board, where it goes through the whole public hearing process, and the town board has complete discretion over whether or not it goes, you know what I mean? Like,
So do you want
we have
that
to
tw-
elect to consider just to start the process.
Right, do you want 20 megawatts plus? or
I
25?
think so. I think under
20.
20 could go to the planning board. I don't know.
Under or 10 plus.
This is not.
I can
going
develop
to
a
the
scale of how
website.
big these projects turn into.
Jim just told me.
I think that would be helpful,
Yeah.
so we get a feeling for what a 10 megawatt project looks like, what does a 25 megawatt look like? I can develop that so we have a
I think
a
that's
grasp
I
of.
think that's where we have to start
Right.
because, on all honesty, like I don't know how many containers 5 megawatts is. I don't know how many containers 100
Five,
is.
you're probably talking about like one single shipping container.
Well, you're
One
looking at the
shipping
in Hampton
container
was
is
a little
2 to 5,
building.
yes.
Yeah, which was a 5. That's it. That's all it took to be a 5. And as the
And
battery
they're gonna get-
technology gets better, you'll probably be able to store greater energy in a smaller scale. I mean, think
Yes.
about what your, what
Well,
your
and I
phone
think-
looks like today versus what your phone looked like 10 years ago.
Our
it's
zoning
the
is
same sort of
continually
concept.
changing too, and I think too, as the battery technology changes and they become less of a fire hazard, then maybe we less, maybe then we can,
Throttle things back.
Soften.
allow a
Yes.
little bit more, soften the code, but the way it stands right now, I mean, people are scared of these things, and
And
it's.
I think you also need to look at single project versus like aggregate for an area too, right? Because, if you just said, well, if a single project is 20 or above, then fine, it's for that building or for that one project. But if you had, on 5 adjoining parcels, each was going to have a 5 megawatt on it, then like the aggregate is hitting 25, but if you only look at it as individual projects on individual parcels, it doesn't trigger the 20, so it's like, I just want to make sure we don't create a mechanism to sidestep the code by saying, well, I'm going to subdivide this parcel and I'm going to split it up, and this container is going to be on this parcel and that container is going to be on that parcel, and really, they're different projects, so it doesn't trigger the 20.
We have language like that in our code already for something else, so I'll just borrow it. for
Yeah, I would
this,
just make
and
sure
not
we don't
allow
give
you to
somebody a way
Do
to
that.
You can't aggregate.
aggregate
Yeah.
across that
Yes.
threshold. and not-
Segmentation, they
Yep.
come in and they
Listen, because it
segment.
happens with the code now, right? You have to meet the energy code if you do greater than a 50%, renovation to the house. But if I split up my, my installation of new windows because I want this specific window and I do 40, 40, 20, I don't necessarily have to meet it. Now I have to drag my project out over, potentially 3 years worth of time period in order to do that. But somebody with the means and desire may take advantage of it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I don't know, can you guys hear me? This is Gary Stevens.
Yay, you're here. Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, I've been listening, sorry I joined about 10 minutes late. Just to give you a sense on size, I don't know if this is helpful or not, but a 1 megawatt system, right, that would be typically would run for 4 hours. So you're talking about a megawatt is 1,000 kilowatts. So that would be a 4,000 kilowatt hour system, like, so 1 megawatt equals 4,000 kilowatt hours. And then in terms of size, it would be like a container of some sort that would be roughly 8 feet by 8 feet on its side, and maybe about 20 feet long. So 8 by 8 by 20. That's this kind of this scale we're talking about. And I agree with someone who said, the technology is definitely changing. That's sort of where things are today, just in terms of size.
So Gary, do you have a sense of what like a large estate type property, would they be reaching toward the 1 megawatt? Is that possible, or they would be under 80 kilowatt hours?
I guess I don't have a good sense for the size of the estates. That's a megawatt.
Let's say 15,000 square foot, home.
It's not outside of the realm of possibility. An enormous home like that, yeah.
We have 60,000 square foot houses.
A
But
heated
but
pool.
but again, that doesn't mean that you can't, that we can't. I'm not pointing at anyone in particular. Limit that. He just started to mention. Gary just started to mention the heated pool and stuff like that. Listen, there's
not a
essential functions of the
necessity, yeah.
property and not. And if you say we don't want it to be, any residential, even on a large estate, to be more than 200 kilowatt hours, or, you know, through whatever was determined to be a reasonable amount to power essential services for not less than, you know, whatever, 36 hours, but not more than, you know, 1 week or something like that, then you could impose whatever that limit is on it for large residential parcels, and they're just going to have to match what they power to what that power supply will run.
Right. That's fair enough.
I would just add that a lot of homes have 4 or 5 cars, and if they were all electric vehicles, you can imagine how fast that would add up to energy
they also-
demand.
Yeah, how does that
Couldn't they
work?
also hook their cars into the house?
Yeah,
Some of them
Gary,
have,
can you,
yeah.
And
can you
vice
kind of
versa.
Yes,
explain that to
and the
us?
2024 International Fire Code addresses that.
Like, what if you have 12 cars in your garage? I mean, how many kilowatts
Do you
is
guys
that?
have any sense of that, Gary?
That, I agree completely, that could be very large. You know, if you have a fleet of electric vehicles, that you want to make sure you've got the ability to charge, that's a considerable load. Especially if you want, you know, you might decide to plunk down the money to put in, you know, faster charging.
DC.
places.
Right.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it depends on how quick they want it
I think it's a
charged.
bridge we have to cross if we get there.
So we are talking about like our tiering, and do you have any advice on this? Like, we want to go from, say, you know, systems from 600 kilowatt hour or just 1 megawatt to 5 megawatt, and then 5 to 10, and then can you just confirm, last time I think Bill Oberker told us the storage goes to, it's storage plus generation in excess of 25 megawatts goes to them. Is that right?
Yeah, for ORES, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I sat through ORES's presentation at the Association of Towns this year, and
Oh, good.
that was, in between them potentially getting rotten tomatoes thrown at them, that was what they said.
Thank you. So we want to do like 1 to 5, 5 to 10, and 10 and above. Does that make sense for LIPA?
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable place to start. You know, from our perspective, like you mentioned, you know, we want a diversity of sizes. That probably, we would look at all those categories as being interesting in their own way.
Would you differentiate between a 5 and a 10, though? Are those significantly large enough to have all of the
Like
rules that
different
we're thinking about
standards?
for utility scale? Would they differ from a 5 to a 10 megawatt?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Probably not.
I mean, the 5 in East Hampton required, you know, all this stuff. It triggered, you know, evacuations and shelter-in-place orders and.
So like what I'm trying to get at is what is it, like below a megawatt, we're sort of not as, you know, we're always concerned, but below a megawatt, we know we can handle with Office of Fire Prevention, we can handle it through, you know, one way, and then above, you know, I'm just trying to get to that, what's the number? It's probably not a magic number, but what's the number where we should start going, oh, well, now you're gonna need some other layer of review added. It becomes additive when it gets to a certain size, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and my perspective, yeah, above a megawatt starts to feel utility, not utility scale, but like it's connected to the grid, and it's something that is like sort of on my radar screen from a control perspective. You know, injecting, discharging, recharging, all that kind of good stuff. So that seems like it would be a point where you'd want to be interested in that as well. So yeah, a megawatts.
And if you start at 1, then I
Start
feel
with
like
1,
it's
yeah.
easy for people to
Go on from there. Yeah. Okay, so so this would then be battery storage systems in excess of 1 megawatt, which is, you said 4,000 kilowatt?
So the
Hours.
No, 1,000.
1,000.
A megawatt is 1,000.
Oh, but you were talking about 4 hours, and then you said 4,000.
Yeah.
Sorry, because I was going to say, I know the kilo is 1,000.
Yeah, I also wanted to point out too, because I think people were concerned when it came up about ORES basically overriding local zoning at 25 megawatts. And, you know, people were like, well, then if they have solar, they're 25, then they can get, I said, well, listen, the solar project that we're doing at the North Sea Transfer Station is, I believe, 4 megawatts. That's the whole transfer station dome, and, I mean, that's a big project. So to have, you know, to times that and to get to 25 megawatts, huge solar
Yeah,
project.
yeah.
So it's not gonna be something that's gonna be,
It seemed to when
on
we-
Mariner Drive.
when Orez did the presentation at Association of Towns, it seemed to be impacting more
Central New York.
central and upstate New York areas that had very large scale farms that had empty space that could accommodate a something of that size.
So couldn't we say we're not going to allow over 25?
Well, they
can
said
overrule
They
if
can overrule
you, they said, well, that's where it gets into a later
If
conversation
there's-
about community benefits, and maybe we'll save that to
If
another
there's
time, but
generation.
that would be something that goes through the
On-site,
town
right.
board, and there's like community benefit agreement potential there where you would be getting payments and things like that out of it.
PDD?
No, it's just, best practices for community benefit agreements. In renewable energy projects, there's a community benefit component usually for large scale.
And that can be an offset on cost
Yeah.
for residents.
Yep,
or-
or other things that are necessary, like a.
East Hampton used
Clearly.
a CBA, a community benefit, to monitor PFAS. And they asked the solar wind, the developer, to monitor PFAS in and around East Hampton. So they used actually a CBA to authorize the wind farm off of East Hampton.
Right, so say we had a Superfund site and you needed help cleaning it up, municipal land, maybe a community benefit, I don't know. You know, that's, we submitted this, we can look at that and talk about that, but that would be at the town board level where you would negotiate with the community some kind of community benefit in order to get over 10 megawatts. And that's, not a bad, so then we're not getting these 100 megawatt things coming to the planning board ever again. We're just, that would come to the town board and that would be a legislative decision. And we'll develop the code for something like that. But for now, we're just keeping it 1 to 5 is, and I'm not sure what the difference in the standards are, but 1 to 5 is one thing and 5 to 10 maybe another. Or is it just 1 to 10? Gary, you're our expert. Should we just do our standards to battery storage in excess of 1 megawatt but not exceeding 10 megawatt?
That's what I would suggest. I don't see much of a difference between 1 and 10 megawatts from what you'd want to look at.
Right, but what about like, does a 1 megawatt system need as much land as say a 10?
Oh, certainly not.
So that's where it would be a little bit different, right? That's why I wanted to use the tiering, because in a 1 megawatt circumstance, you may require an acre, but in a 10 megawatt, you may require 10 acres or something. I'm just making that up, but you know what I mean, right?
To meet all your setbacks.
To meet everything.
In a sense, the more tiers we have, the more flexibility we have. If we just, having 600 as our beginning and then above, that kind of really limited us to everything seemed to feel like it was going to be utility scale. So perhaps if we do keep a few of those tiers, we can think about the future and the fact that residences will be using more energy, especially if we electrify homes. So maybe we should keep a few options available where we can say, okay, this is a commercial style, this is a large home, or this is now beyond.
I think the one, anything over 1, really, I think should meet the setbacks that were, and then that's really gonna set your size, like your property is only gonna be able to handle what you can put on that property meeting the setbacks, whether it's 1 or it's 20.
Well, if you look at C, we have parcels upon which battery energy storage systems are placed shall adhere to the dimensional. So we say minimum is 40. Number 2, we're gonna recommend crossing out, right? Like a minimum for residential. Because we're not
doing
we're not
residential.
doing that now. Or you may do it but less than a megawatt, right? Like,
Yeah, but I think we need to focus on.
let's focus on this. So,
I
one,
would consider.
C1 says the minimum in excess of 600 shall be 40,000. What I was trying to get at, is it 1 to 5 is 40,000, but a 5 to 10 is,
Well, would you
3
say
acres?
1 acre per megawatt?
is that reasonable, Gary? 1
I
acre
don't
per
think
megawatt?
so.
It's not.
Because if you're saying 1 megawatt is 1 storage container, and now you're doing 2 storage containers, so you need 2 acres.
Yeah, it's probably excessive. In all honesty, it's probably excessive.
I
to
say as long as
to
you
go
can meet
1
your
acre
setbacks.
per megawatt, because you're looking at basically like a Cassone trailer type, size for a 5. So to drop that in the middle of an acre, like to say you needed another acre for each one of them is probably more than
Well, you're not
you
gonna,
need to
you know,
do.
you also, it comes down to the fundamental, like, do you want these things to be here? Because if you don't, you're not gonna, you know, if you make it too restrictive, you won't get them.
You have to meet
And-
your setbacks. Whatever we decide safety-wise are the setbacks, based on where your
So
property
an
is and what you're
LI
next
40,
to.
if we're talking about LI 40, the 40 stands for 40,000 square feet, which is the minimum size you need in an industrial zone to have an industrial use. So that feels right, because you can have it for anything else, so what's the difference,
Yeah.
right? So up to 5, I'm just saying, and Gary, what, in your experience, for what you've seen, what's the average parcel size for a system that's 10 megawatts?
Well, these things all, they're containerized, right, so they all get stacked on top of each other, and so it's definitely not linear, right? So, like, 1 to 2 megawatts, you wouldn't double the size of the property.
Also, we need
that's-
height
that's
restrictions too.
We had that in here. We did. You want to keep it at minimum 40, and then we can come back to this.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
just
like I
think
said,
about
Well,
it.
maybe you want the next trigger for a size to be
5.
above 5.
Above 5, so between 1 and 5
Right.
is this.
And maybe
now.
you say anything above 5 needs an extra, quarter acre for every, megawatt above 5 or something like that, if you wanted to scale it, which would be still maybe a lot, but maybe that's what you want to do.
Okay. We'll take that into consideration. B, utility lines and electrical circuitry.
Yeah.
It says all under on-site, I jumped to C, but I just want to get back to B. All on-site utility lines shall be buried underground. Seth had the recommendation, battery containment structures or cabinets should be elevated by structural metal I-beams in conjunction with a metal horizontal platform over a poured concrete impermeable slab. Is this something that LIPA requires, or like the fire marshal?
It actually sounds like it's one of their distribution facilities, one of LIPA's,
Or Con Ed's, yeah.
yeah.
If I may, I just saw it online. They did it in England. Everything was elevated 2 or 3 feet. It was all steel, a steel framework, and they put the cabinets on top so they could see what was going on underneath and above. It was a 100 megawatt facility out in the pastures of England, and it was quite breathtaking. It was a nice
Because this sounds like
facility.
a overkill for like a 1 or 5
Yeah, but it also
megawatt.
sounds like what they're trying to do is keep everything above so nothing happens to the animals on the farm,
Right.
Whereas I would think you'd have a little bit more of an issue, especially where unintentional abrasion to the wires or something like that comes into contact with the steel. Now what do you have? Everything electrified,
That's
you know?
interesting.
So, which is not a good thing.
So maybe that's like a standard for 10 megawatt plus, like in the
Wear
world
your
of
rubber
big,
boots.
It
big.
is a big utility
big
scale
ones.
thing that I only saw it having been done, so
Yeah.
I thought I would throw the suggestion out there, but yeah, we
Yeah,
wouldn't
more
want to
than likely,
electrify
I-
the whole thing. no.
Without looking at at what you were looking
Right.
at, just an educated guess would say that they're trying to keep this thing above the animals. Maybe it was in a farm where the animals root around. Could be a pig farm, could
Yep.
be, whatever.
Yeah, that's just a different story than what we're talking about here. So, C1 we talked about, C2 we're gonna cross out. C3 says the maximum height, for any building or structure shall be 20 feet, except as may be required in FEMA flood zone, and that's where you're elevated. Any thoughts on this height restriction?
Well, wait, what about the C2? We're not gonna say if it's over 10, we're gonna have
We're
it
gonna cross that
be
out,
1/4 acre for each megawatt.
So
in addition.
C1, C2 is gonna get crossed out. C1, we're gonna tier it to 1 to 5 megawatts requires 40,000, and then we can put for every 5, every megawatt
include it
above
there.
5, you need another 10,000 square feet. Something like that, even though, like Gary said, it's not linear, but we can,
Well, but if you,
So you're limiting the height.
It is linear if you don't
Limit the
allow it to
height.
stack over 20 feet,
that's right.
which, to be quite honest with you, I think from a fire perspective, I would rather not necessarily see it stacked.
Nope.
Okay.
I'd rather see separations between them so that if there was an issue with one, it limited your exposure to the other. I mean, it's ideal to
Is
just
there
wire
any-
them together stacked, but from a safety perspective, I would think that the separations and cutting back on the exposure risk would be better.
Yeah,
And
most definitely.
FDNY has that, anything about that? Because they are supposed to be the supposed gold standard in this regard. Did anybody have a chance to read that, or can we
Not
come
yet.
back on that one?
I think we could put in there that cabinets are not to be stacked. I mean, that would make perfect sense. You don't want to put one cabinet on top of another, but you have to keep in mind that a cabinet is a racked system of batteries. As it is, we're looking at 100 batteries stacked up within that.
Right.
I have yet to see a facility that had cabinet on top of cabinets, but we could certainly say that's not permitted. You need to have these things spread out and.
Right.
and
Like Brian was saying,
certainly-
from the safety aspect of it, it would be the most common sense thing to do. And separating them, like you said as well, with enough of a distance in between where the firefighters are still gonna be able to operate in there safely.
Yeah.
And
So
the
this says.
safety would be, that it wouldn't spread to the next container over either.
So FDNY has this requirement. They say, the fire department anticipates that medium and large outdoor stationary storage battery systems will be housed in containers and other enclosures. Malfunctioning stationary storage battery systems can generate flammable gases, and enclosures in which they are housed could allow these gases to collect and reach dangerous levels. Accordingly, the rule requires that the enclosures be designed with fire and gas detection systems and other fire protection systems, explosion protection, and a manual exhaust system for firefighter use.
It's a code requirement.
Yeah.
That's already out there, so we don't have
Well-
to replicate it here.
It's not been adopted by the state yet. This goes back to some of so the code that we're looking at right now, this 33162, is zoning code. The fire code's a whole separate issue. So
Right.
we can delve into that at some point. I know Bill last time said that the 2024 International Fire Code, when you do a side-by-side comparison, is the same as the 2020 New York State Fire Code. I had them up on two separate screens before I came here, and there are quite a few
can't we be
differences.
But this
More
is FDNY's rules, not the
Right.
fire code.
But so can't we,
Right.
but can't we be more restrictive and
Yes,
and
you could
require
be.
that new
Yes.
code?
Yes, without a doubt.
So
I would
this
hope that we would be.
FDNY standard could something we can
We
envelop
could,
in.
yes,
Okay, so this is a maybe there, a possible good
right.
one.
But what you're looking at there is probably more of a fire code.
This was adopted in
requirement
their
than a
rules
zoning
in
code
2019.
requirement. Yeah.
So this is their rules already in place. Okay, so we're still on C, 20
C3,
feet, C3.
where we're not doing the 20 feet, we're saying they can't be stacked.
But I just wanna,
20
Right.
feet is,
As we-
no, they can be 20 feet high, but there's air
would
and
be
light in there. We're
stacking.
saying
I wouldn't
one
stack 'em.
structure can't be stacked on top of another.
I wouldn't stack them, not even with a separation distance in between.
No, I'm not,
Oh.
Cause they're
recommending
8 feet
stacking.
tall.
Yeah.
So
Right.
they
Because he
shouldn't
was
exceed
saying they're-
10? Are you
He said
saying
they're
10?
8 by 8, so.
Gary,
8 by 8
how
for
tall
20.
are the
I would do
enclosures?
10.
8.
So the one I mentioned, the 1 megawatt one, is 8 by 8 by 20.
20 long.
So
But do you have a height on
8.
that?
Eight.
8 feet.
8 wide, 8 tall, 20
So you
long.
want to say 8.
It's like a cassone
So they want
You
to
don't
be
want
10.
to see it over a fence.
So the maximum height shall be 10 or 8?
No more
Well,
than
let's,
10.
let's look
more than
into
10. Shall
which
not
ones
exceed
are
10.
We'll just
available.
put, I would just,
Maximum height shall not exceed 10. Sound good?
yeah.
And the
I mean,
units, yeah, may not be stacked.
Gary, do these containers have cooling equipment on top of it?
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good point, a lot of them do, a lot of the.
I would leave it
gas
at 20 and put
evacuations
something in there about not
are-
stacking containers.
10 feet.
I would, I would decrease it.
15?
We'll
Because
just say not
otherwise you're
exceed
allowing that
10
structure.
except for
Yeah, they'll
cooling
get
You could do
systems.
15,
Trailer.
and then knock it down a little bit, then it accounts for some of the HVAC on top of it, which honestly, even
Shouldn't
at
be
10
over 4
foot, if it
feet.
was 8 feet, yeah, it should still be able to account for it. But you could go to 15 if you wanted to instead of 10.
It was 20 before. So you want to go to 15?
Yeah.
Okay. Or do you want to say 10 except for cooling HVAC system?
Yeah, I like that better
Okay.
personally.
And no stacking.
All right.
Got it.
I just want to, just as we move forward with, distances and heights and all this other stuff, and talk about FDNY and what they're doing and how they're the gold standard, and it's all fine and good. We really have to keep in mind that when you look at our LI 40 and you look at, potential sites, you go into the city and there are very many ways to get out of the city. When you talk about Southampton and you look at where those sites lie, almost all of them are on our coastal evacuation route. So when you go back to what NYSERDA said, and they said you're zoning for where this level of fire, potential fire hazard can go, you're talking about our coastal evacuation route.
Right, but you're also talking about limiting to 10 megawatt. So
And
now,
this is why
yeah.
I'm saying, like, is 100 megawatt on that route acceptable anywhere?
Probably not. And that's where you're going to put that into your hands as a legislator and say, only in these circumstances is this ever gonna be allowed? And then you can decide whether or not they meet those criteria.
And like I said, as technologies advance and we get things like sodium batteries and we get
Yep.
batteries that don't have the fire hazard, then we can lax things. And maybe then we can hand it back over to the planning board or say, not such a big deal anymore. It's
Right.
okay.
But the
Right now, they're still catching fire.
fire potential for 5 versus 100 is very different.
Different, yes.
Right.
And to
Okay.
your point, that's why it's so important to have accountability and make sure, and inspections, to make sure that the private or public companies that have these are maintaining them the right way. And it's not just a piece of paper, but they're tested and they're inspected regularly, and there's heavy consequences for not doing that because of the evacuation that has to be done if a hazmat situation.
And FTNY firefighters are paid. So we need to take that into consideration when we're talking about this as well.
Gary,
Well,
I have a
that's that
question
community
for you.
benefit agreement. I'll send you one of them.
What's the life expectancy of the commercial batteries versus the residential? Any ideas?
So the utility scale one, I'm not sure about commercial, that size, but the ones that are the megawatt and above, we're entering into 20-year contracts with these batteries, so at least 20 years. Now, they may have to occasionally replace some of the modules as time goes on, just in terms of normal, maintenance and upgrades. But, yeah, we're pretty comfortable with 20 years at least, and they'll probably go longer than that.
So Gary, I don't want to go too far off track because we are making ground here, but with what you're saying, is there a long-term plan to dispose of the batteries and recycle them even as technology advances and they become obsolete?
Yeah, that would be a good question for Bill, on the development side. I don't know. I know from our perspective, we would enter into a contract, say, at, I don't know, like the East Hampton battery. At the end of the PPA, they essentially got to clear out the site, restore it back to its original, condition. So we don't really get into the recycling aspect of it, and what happens in terms of salvage value.
So,
That's a good question.
I have read quite a bit on it. It's a nascent industry. They're learning how to recycle these batteries. They're thinking, in fact, that the utility scale, we might start to use the EV batteries as they are no longer useful, discharging rapidly. They will serve our purposes for battery energy storage because they can just hold on to the energy and slowly release it. So there is this capacity that these batteries maintain no matter what, and they can be refurbished, and then they can be put back on the market. But it is not, as of right now, it's too cheap to just make the batteries, and no one is really investing in recycling them as of yet. But as they come online, it would be a waste not to.
Gary, does LIPE have any plans to put battery energy storage on some of the existing sites in the town with where
Yes.
you do?
When you say existing sites, you mean existing substations?
Transfer
Yes.
stations.
yeah.
Yeah, that would be, in many cases, that's the ideal place to put them, right? Because you've got all the electrical interconnections, the community is used to it, from a kind of an electrical infrastructure perspective. And they tend to be good spots, on the grid. So, yeah, to the extent we can. Now, the kind of mitigating against that is a lot of our land on the
Residential.
ground has always been expensive. So the substations tend to be tight to begin with. It wasn't like we had the sort of buy for future expansion. So a lot of our substations tend to be tight, but where there's room, yeah, that's where we like to put them.
And
in.
then even where you have room, you also need to reserve room for expansion of the substation itself, correct?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, people forget, with electrification, the direction we're going is for higher energy consumption, which means that there needs to be more of everything from an energy infrastructure perspective. So more transformers and bigger transformers, more switchgear, all that stuff to serve additional load, in the form of heating, heat pumps, EVs, all that. That's all new electrical load. So yeah, that's what the future looks like. More infrastructure.
Because you're assuming there's gonna be, increased population? I mean, why do you think that there has to be so much more of an additional load?
Electric cars.
So, no, the answer is no, we're not assuming more population, it's just a shift. Just to take heating, for example, effectively what we're doing is we're transferring all the energy consumption from fossil fuels, that's in the form of oil and gas and propane today, that's all getting transferred over to the electrical system in terms of energy delivery. So while the energy infrastructure for oil, propane, and gas sort of withers away and no longer needed, we need to, make the investment on the electrical side to make sure that we can sort of pick up that load. It's sort of energy load in a different form.
Oh, I see. Are you looking at the lithium-free sodium batteries or any other alternatives like the compressed air? I mean, there's a lot of literature out there now with alternatives that are being, people are looking into them and developing them. Is that something that you're looking at too?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, so definitely interested in sodium batteries. We don't like to do projects that are R&D projects, so to speak. We like to commercialize, infrastructure, but as those things become prevalent and used, that will be at the forefront of putting them in.
Can we
Just
require?
one thing, just go back for a second, I'm sorry, on firefighter training, someone mentioned the volunteer nature of the fire force. One of the things I heard, I was out in Arizona talking to some of the utilities out there, and one of the things they said was really important is to make sure that your developers are continually training the first responders, because there's turnover within the ranks of the first responders, right? So you do training, and a year and a half later, you've got some turnover, and maybe they sort of lose some of that learning. So making sure that the training is ongoing or periodic in some way might be something that is important going forward for you.
And maybe
We couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and not just to provide that training, but to pay for the training, because
Yeah.
it costs money to train the employees. So that would be important.
Yeah, that was something that was actually brought up in the interagency working groups report that I know was a topic of contention with one of the reviewing parties, and we, in our office, pushed back against that and said that it was something that we felt very strongly should be present, and that the annual requirement should be present because it keeps people up to speed on what they need to know and how they need to deal with the situations. Plus, it also adds another inherent layer of monitoring and making sure that the site is in order and that the documents are in order. If you know every single year you're going to have to, at the very least, engage in that training too, and there will be outside eyes present, it makes sure that things stay as they should. So it kind of serves a double purpose.
Can we require that they have an agreement in place to connect before they come to us, or did that come later, Janice?
That's a good question for Gary.
That was
Gary,
that-
that was our original
Yeah.
question is,
Yes.
how do we, which comes first, the power purchase agreement or the control of the site? And we would rather it be you than us.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's the other way around typically, especially for larger things. The developers have to demonstrate site control before they can move their part in process. So basically, giving the right to connect to the grid, before that happens, because we get a lot of requests, right? We get hundreds of requests, so in terms of prioritizing them, the litmus test is, do you control the site?
It makes
So if we didn't
sense,
have that, we'd have thousands and thousands of requests.
And then we also-
Because people are doing things on a speculative basis.
What's the earliest thing in the process that a developer could do with you that could time most closely simultaneously with what they have to do with us? So if we were to say, as a requirement, we want you to demonstrate that you've filed application X or sent letter of intent to person Y or whatever it is, what's the first thing that they could do in the process with you guys so that we could try and line that up as closely to the first thing, the first available opportunity in our process to say that we want to know that they're appropriately engaging with LIPA in a timely fashion? Because a denial on either side is a no start, right? Like the you say no or we say no, it's a no start. So what's the thing that we can check a box and say, you need to have done this with LIPA by this point with us to match things up?
Yeah, I would say the answer to that is probably have they filed their generator interconnection application. That's critical, because if they don't have that, then basically they're not connected to the grid.
And does that cost them money to file that?
Yeah, it costs money, and then there's deposits associated with it. And so I think if you have that, then you have a pretty good sense that they're relatively serious.
I also don't want to back us into that point where we get to with these applications where they're like, but I spent, $1 million and you have to give this to me now because I went through all this process and, because we get into that with other zoning things, so it's not,
So you called it a generator interconnection
Application.
Gary, what about using the hosting capacity map? Isn't that a first hurdle? If an applicant files that they want to do 10 megawatts, if they're going to have to spend $5 million per mile to bury a cable, and we can tell them, you're not even close to a cable that'll take 10 megawatts, wouldn't that be an initial way to be like, this won't work?
Yeah, that could even precede what I just described, right? Because they won't even bother with the generator interconnection application and the deposits associated with that if they understand that
You
they've got
can't get there from
multi-millions
here.
of upgrades they need to
Right.
do.
So then we could use the hosting capacity map to say that unless you're willing to spend on buried cables, that your proposal probably wouldn't work. That would be an initial step without people spending a lot of money.
Maybe the code could say the, planning department will confer with LIPA to determine, because we can't repost those maps. They're, kind of not out there for the general public, and we, so we can have some kind
If
of
it's serious
requirement that
applicants,
the
they're gonna know.
planners have to
They should have
liaison
studied
with.
that already.
Yeah, they gotta know.
I mean, is that a real number, $5 million per mile?
That was from the last
I
meeting.
know we mentioned that.
Right.
One of you had mentioned it, Gary. I don't know if it was you or Bill.
Prevailing wage and the amount of guys that do that work.
I mean, $5 million per mile.
That's probably incorporating the cable and the work to bury it.
Yeah, underground construction is incredibly expensive.
I mean, I just saw that.
Yeah, so maybe,
time it took them to put
like
a
you were
gas
saying,
line
Seth,
down
maybe
that road.
whether it's
Not
like some
very
sort of
far.
benefit cost analysis and looking at that, the hosting map, maybe some sort of combination of that is part of the earliest possible evaluative process. And the onus should be on, obviously, the developer to demonstrate that they've looked at all that as well. So,
It would seem if they're trying to make money, which is what this is about at the end of the day,
yeah.
that they would have to have done that analysis.
Okay, good.
Um,
We have the height, then we had the required transitional inside, and required transition side and rear yard shall be 50 feet. That was
doesn't seem like
another
enough.
issue. Now we're capping out here in this code at 10 megawatt, right? And then anything over 10 is gonna go to the town board, it's gonna be a different animal altogether. So at 10 megawatt system, should it be 50 feet, 100 feet?
What is well, we have to look at the fire department code, because it was like 300 feet evacuation downwind. And
Yes.
I'm just saying that, because I remember reading it could be different, but
But is that a transition side and rear yard? I'm
that's,
talking just setbacks to this cabinet thing.
50
Is it three?
feet doesn't seem like.
It
enough
50
to
feet
me.
doesn't seem like enough. That's a normal transition yard in LI 40, but we can make it whatever
You're
you,
looking at an extra hazard on this versus, you know, your normal setbacks and stuff. So
Right.
you may want to look at 75 to 100 feet.
100 feet?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just,
We can look at what that means in the LI 40 maps and show you 100 feet.
I'm just thinking in my mind of the LI 40 where we have Riverside Sewer District. And there's a school right there. You know what I mean? Like, is 50 feet enough from that school property line where those kids are playing?
Well, they're only doing a small storage to
No,
the
I'm not saying,
solar.
I'm not saying what
Right.
they're doing or what's proposed. I'm saying in your mind, to me,
Right.
50 feet is not enough.
Well, I think, again, it's tiered, right? So Gary, once again, thank God you're here. What's, what's like an appropriate, is it 300 feet? Is it 100 feet? We just want to be, I'm going the extreme, 10 megawatt system to a residential adjoining. I know this comes into Bill's realm and more fire than capacity, and that's really your role, but can you tell us what you've seen?
Well, I guess the question, I'd ask a question back, which is what are you trying to achieve
Right.
with the setbacks?
We're just trying to,
Not,
Safety buffer.
we're trying to not evacuate in a school.
Protect the
which that would be
exposure. Protect the
300.
exposures.
If you're not gonna worry about evacuation, it would be 300 feet. And I don't know if that makes it impossible to find any piece of property.
I
that-
think you're gonna knock out almost
Yeah,
every
no,
piece
I
of property.
I
Yeah.
understand. Yeah, I see what you mean.
I don't even think these
Because of the-
properties are 300 feet in width.
Yeah.
I guess
That would just be
something
taking
to
away,
see on the map.
that would just be taking away the,
So I think we might need to look at this in a couple of different ways, where there's maybe some ands or ors in this section of the code, right? Depending on
If you're
what,
near
what the nearest
community
structure is, whether it's on a coastal evacuation route, because, maybe you want to go 50 feet away from the lot line on one side of it, if that makes it so that on the other side, you're 300
300
feet away from the
a
roadway.
hospital or a
Right,
school.
so, in some cases, I would say maybe you want to just be in the drop-dead center of the parcel, so you're away from, the furthest away from everything around all sides. But in other cases, you may want to favor one side of the parcel because of what exists on the other side of the parcel, and it just makes more sense to do that. So
Okay.
I
So
think we may
we
need to
kinda-
have a couple of ors or ands in this section of the code to
Yeah.
address some of those considerations.
Sure. So we actually, not to beat a dead, we do this in cell towers, the height of the cell tower. If it's to vacant land.
Right, fall
It's
zone
one thing.
calculation,
If it's,
yeah.
there's a house there, it's another thing.
Right.
And there's different, so we'll
Same
kind
sort of concept,
of,
yeah.
okay, we can do that. The
But it wouldn't
minimum,
be less than 100 feet, I wouldn't think.
and in no
if
case
it's-
less than
But I would
100
also
feet.
take
for
into consideration
residents,
those
school, or
type of
hospital.
What if
buildings,
it's-
right, schools and hospitals that you don't want to evacuate.
What if
can't
it's
evacuate
adjoining
easily.
vacant land, you know what I mean? So you wouldn't say it's
Schools,
only
hospitals,
100, it has to be
yeah.
100 feet if there's nobody there and it's protected land,
Right.
let's say.
Right, then I
Right up
think you
against
could
it.
go to 50.
Right, so
on
you're
that
gonna
side,
allow
maybe.
it to be sort of a flex.
Favor that, yeah, yeah.
All right. The minimum screening, 5, the minimum screening within required yards shall include landscape plantings to be erected and maintained along the front, side, and rear property lines. The planning board may modify these requirements for screening where the same or better screening effect is accomplished by the natural terrain or foliage. Any changes there?
I don't think so. The only thing that we want to watch is how close that screening gets to the storage facility itself.
I'm just going through Southold's recommendation on clearances. They are recommending 750 feet, not from the line, but from any occupied community building, disaster response facilities, critical environmental areas, combustible storage facility, or similarly sensitive locations. And then 500 feet from any critical transportation infrastructure.
So we should look at, as we start to develop those
Yeah.
ands and ors,
Yeah,
maybe that's one to refer back to as well.
Okay,
'Cause
and
it's
if
the
you
same
could pull
concept.
out the fire code, the 300 feet or whatever that was, the
That was in the
correct-
SCMY code,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, FDNY evacuation.
So we'll
If-
have that.
If it releases gases.
It's
So
the
next
gases.
time around, we'll delve a little more deeply, we're almost out of time, but we'll delve more deeply into this section.
So that was
Uh,
750, not from the property line, but from
From
the
the
structure
structure.
on the neighboring property.
That's
really
kind of
limit things.
overkill. I mean,
That's a
for a
lot.
5 megawatt system, that's huge.
That was
That
from,
setback.
that was from a, like, a sensitive, like I said, like a community building, or a school, or a
Hospital.
shelter, or hospital, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
from that kind of a place, like Chief was saying, a place that you do not want to have to evacuate.
Right.
You know,
Similarly, be an
getting 5
evacuation
people out of their
center.
house is different than getting people out of hospital beds.
No doubt about it. Which, by the way, our hospital is in the village, so we don't have to worry about it for
For
now.
now, anyway.
Now, design and visibility, views minimized. Well, I don't want to waste too much time. I just want to make sure we get all our questions to Gary before we wrap up, like before we jump into like design stuff. Do we have further questions about like the battery systems themselves, or the stuff we started talking about early on, capacity planning?
The only, but the design and visibility, the one thing, and I'll let you comment on this. The one thing that I would just keep in mind with it, there's a kind of a disagreement in the sense of wanting to hide it so that it's not a facility that's presents an eyesore to the public, but at the same time, for site security purposes, I think that has to be balanced with, now this is a piece of critical infrastructure that, you know, we want to know if something bad's happened to it. So I think you have to weigh out the screening and figure out, you know, how to do that, and maybe even if there's
And
a way to
lighting.
put a code requirement in that has to allow access to on-site surveillance or something like that to dispatch to be able to pull it up if there's a concern there, or whatever it is. I don't know. I don't want to obscure something so much that if somebody tries to do something bad to it, it can't be seen.
Well, we talked about video
Right.
surveillance last
Yeah.
time, but that's huge.
So, I mean, if there's a way to incorporate that in as a requirement, that it has to have something that from the public safety perspective, from the police department perspective, as a piece of critical infrastructure could be monitored, I would try and incorporate that in somehow.
Okay, good. I agree.
You move the alarm system into it too, where they have.
Typically, they're going to have like some type of like fenced-in kind
Right.
of yard
Oh, yeah.
with the containment units,
No,
and
that-
then the screening happens outside of that
Yep.
fenced-in area, right? Okay, just want to get that right. I thought we had a couple questions for Gary. Seth, remember? I had asked you to give him a call.
Yeah. It was definitely on the tiering of,
What's the secret status of, are you done with production? And as they get bigger, as we consider bigger facilities, should they become automatic type 1?
That's what Southwold was recommending, that anything grid scale is a type 1 action, and they have to mitigate everything.
Is that everything
They have
over
to go
10?
through scoping, they have to do, I think it should be anything over,
Um,
anything that comes to the town board should be a type 1 action.
Type 1 would be, definitely be appropriate for the
10 and
10 and above, and probably for 1 and above. I don't see why not, if you're making them go through this whole process, it's just the different board is reviewing it, but I think, you know, I'd have to check with Secra, because they changed a lot of the CLCPA changed some ways of looking at it, so let me just check that out, but I definitely agree, we should.
If the state ends up adopting the 2024 IFC, similar requirements will be in place under the fire code anyway for hazard mitigation and analysis. So you wouldn't really necessarily be doing anything that was overly onerous to anyone at that point by making that a requirement, because as part of the hazard mitigation analysis, we should be looking at environmental too, in our considerations. So whether you make it a requirement there or not, they're gonna kind of have to comply with basically the same things anyway, under the fire code.
Right, but a type 1 action means that the planning board, kicks that whole secret process into play, and then it would be referred to your agency for
Right.
that purpose. Okay,
Yep.
yeah, type 1 sounds right. So that's a companion code to chapter 158.
Actually, if I may, yeah, Gary, the hosting maps that you've provided for us, they break down the energy storage into recharge and discharge. Can you just speak to us on what the difference is for your transmission lines, and which sites are therefore suitable for putting battery energy storage?
You know what, I'm gonna have to punt a little bit on that. I think I can give you a better answer if I get the people that put it together, maybe at a subsequent meeting,
Sure enough.
if that's okay.
Does that mean you'll come back again next time?
Yeah, oh, yeah, absolutely, I'm happy to help. But
Yay.
I probably need to line up someone from, East Side Long Island who was intimately involved with sort of the kind of the engineering design.
Okay.
Give you a good answer. Give you
Great.
an accurate answer.
Thank you.
Do you have any
And-
others?
Yeah, well, I was we were discussing just the basic economics of what becomes too onerous for these developers, because we were also thinking about community benefit agreements. Do you have a sense of what how the cost benefit works out for these these utility scale battery energy storage? It's probably a very long conversation. I'm not sure I can get in 2 minutes.
Yeah, yeah, it's been on a general basis. Like anything else, there are big economies of scale. So the bigger you go, the better the economics look, right? And so that, you have to weigh that against the other considerations, which is where are you gonna put a giant battery? The siting issues become really a big problem. Now, the cost of batteries has come down really quite dramatically, right, over the last, 5 to 10 years. So that's helped a lot. But they're still relatively expensive vis-a-vis existing other technologies. But they've got a lot of really great benefits, right? They're quiet, emissions-free storage units, and that's, being able to store energy is incredibly important for us. So, and I guess the last thing I would say is changing pretty rapidly. As the technology changes, I expect the costs to come down even further. So I think these are gonna be part of the framework of electricity for quite a long time.
So we're not unique in this situation. It has nothing to do with the price of our electricity and the charging and discharging of peak and non-peak. Is that a bridge too far?
So the main thing, there's an article today in the New York Times that if you haven't seen it, you should take a look at it. They do a good job of explaining why batteries are so important. They talk a lot about California, but it applies to New York as well. And kind of in a sentence, it's all about intermittent renewables. Once you build the offshore wind, it's effectively free, and so you don't want to quote unquote spill any of that energy. You use it all, and there are times when you're not using it in the middle of the night or in the middle of the winter. And so it makes a lot of economic sense to store it somewhere, and right now the best technology for that is a battery.
Yes. Okay.
Does anybody else have questions for Gary? We're kind of almost out of time.
I just
Can
have a
I just
recommendation.
toss out 2 more items to keep in mind, and we'll, obviously, some of these are a little bit addressed in the fire code, hopefully what will become the New York State Fire Code, but just on-site runoff capture containment. I think we're in a unique situation that some of the rest of the state doesn't necessarily take that into consideration to the same degree. They do, but being that we have a sole source aquifer, I think looking at the containment and spill containment is worked into the 2024, IFC again, which is a good thing, but it's based on, the largest battery on site. I think we may want to look at some additional requirements based on the unique water supply system that we have in our area. So if there's a way to factor some on-site, containment into our requirements, I think that would be a smart move for us to get ahead of things.
Even if it doesn't end up capturing everything.
Right, it just.
At least some of it helps.
Something's certainly better than nothing.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily gonna be able to say you have to build containment that's gonna hold every droplet of water that's used in the event that there had to be a fire suppression activities. But if you, almost like the same kind of concept of having an oil holding tank at a facility, you see the walls built around it, and it's intended to hold up to X amount of what's inside the tank, right? Similar type of concept. And then one of the topics that's kind of come up, and again, so we look more in the fire mindset of certain things, but an identified insurance provider or remediation company that has to be updated, on an annual basis for these types of things. Because one of the situations that you have is, God forbid something does go wrong, it's who's remediating that, and how is it getting taken out of there? Whatever company it is that they identify that's going to conduct the remediation, activities, it should be part of the requirement. And whether we get it into here or not, I'd love to see it show up in as many places in the code as possible, not just in the new New York State code once it gets updated, but I'd love to see it, captured in here if we can too, as something else that once you hit that threshold for whatever, I'd love to see it on the residentials as well, because it could be a problem there just as easily. We can't let people go back into houses if there's been a fire and it involves the power storage systems in these houses. So now you've got displaced residents for an extended period of time. You have a routine, house fire that's limited to a room and contents fire. You could potentially have people back in there that evening if it's not disrupted some of their other systems. You have a fire in a house that involves energy storage, because of the possibility for a reignition, you're not letting them in the house until that's been removed from the site. So that could be, depending on whether or not they've got coverage under insurance, they've got an identified remediation company, whatever it is, that could be days. Now you've got displaced people for days. So when we talk about a larger system, somebody to come in and remediate, somebody to deal with, any issues, if we can get it in, that would be ideal.
And it was my understanding from somebody in the industry who said, in the insurance industry, that said they won't even cover these systems.
Yeah.
So making sure that they do have insurance in case of, a
But if they're not
catastrophic
covering the
event is-
systems, are they covering the buildings that these systems are installed in?
Yeah. And that.
Because if they're the cause of the fire, let's say, are they covering still the damage to the building, or are they going?
Right,
Yeah.
it could be a trigger for an exemption under their coverage.
Right.
So it's something that people should look into, but it's something that perhaps if there's ways for us to get it in, it would prompt them fulfilling that and looking into it and whatever it might be.
And then containment that you mentioned could go under letter K. There's already some information in there, what's required for shutdown procedures.
Right.
So we could,
Right, there will be
Bulk that
redundancy in the zoning code and the fire code, for sure. And I think that's a good thing, the more, on some of these, especially on safety stuff, the more redundancy between the two of them, the more we make sure that we hopefully don't miss something that's gonna provide for better safety. So, yeah, I've been pushing this on-site containment since we first started having these conversations because of the nature of our water supply system, so I think that's a key thing.
And we do have a good code in the special standards for construction and paving companies.
Yeah.
That says exactly that. Because of the nature of our aquifer, you have to retain all the washing water on your site, and it has to be recycled.
Yeah.
So that is in the code. So we can adopt that, it doesn't have to be all of the water perhaps, but
Right.
it should be Any
Yeah, some
water
sort
that's
of-
used
some
on
sort
that
of
site
capture.
stays on the site.
Is the water for fire suppression in the code also where it is, where it's located, and it would be the cost of the person building the BESS to move it closer?
I have seen that,
That
yes,
would
where
probably,
they
that
have
would definitely
Yeah.
come up through site plan review as well.
250 feet. If there's not one within 250 feet, then you have to supply one.
Right, you have to bring it,
Yes.
Right.
yeah, at your cost, we'll build it, but you have to pay for it.
So I have just a suggestion about, I know our next meeting on the 22nd at 6 was supposed to be, a poster session where we would look at kind of the zoning maps and stuff. I know that there's been people watching these meetings, either live or reviewing them. I think we've thrown a lot of things out, and I would like to get some public feedback on some of the suggestions we've made, some of the tweaks we've made. Before we go too far down the road, I'd like to get some feedback from the public on what their take is on the things that we've proposed, and do they feel like we're headed in the right direction to where they feel okay with this? And
Well, that
so-
was the poster session. That was like an informal way, instead of the 3 minutes. You have more time to talk, look at maps, maybe invite others to come and see if they can give presentations even. It's a little bit short on time right now. It's already the 7th, and that's the 22nd.
No, I mean, that's what I was thinking.
Maybe we should
doing
push
that
it out.
22nd meeting, just for people to come in here and give us feedback on what
You
we've
could,
been speaking
it's
about and
absolutely
proposing.
at your, I
This
just
way, we
was-
don't get too far down the road before they go, well, wait a second, you said this, but we don't,
maybe that 22nd is the next, this kind of meeting,
Yeah.
when we have
Yeah.
Gary
but we
and
allow
George
people
and
come in to speak.
people can come in, and we can put the maps in here. We don't have to have it in the
Mm-hmm.
auditorium. We were just trying to create a more informal way of interacting. That's less.
I just like it being recorded, because there's a lot of people that either can't make it, or, they're okay with not being here as long as they know what was discussed. And
Right.
it gives them a more structured way to come in and give their comments, and, it's 5 minutes, I don't know, but we.
So
see how many
whatever
people
you
show
want to
up,
do.
or-
What do you want to do? You want to do it on that day?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with the day and the time, I
Yeah.
think that's what we put out there, and people are okay with that, but.
What
I guess
was
we have to
that
see if
day?
this room is
The
available.
20th.
Wednesday, the
Second.
22nd.
Yeah, we didn't check if this room was available,
Yeah.
but
I'll get right on that.
But what are we gonna
if
do
we were going
about
to do it in the
this?
evening,
It's at
do you
6
still want
o'clock.
to, at 6 o'clock?
Yeah. I mean, because that's what we've already put it out there and told people, it was gonna be 6 o'clock on the 22nd, so.
Did we? I was going to confirm that here today.
Well, we said it at the last meeting, so I
Oh,
know
okay.
people had heard it, and.
All right, that sounds good. I mean, is that good with
Yeah,
you?
I mean, that's fine. We
Is
did
that
say
good
the
with
date.
everyone else?
I don't remember if we said the time, but it's easier for people to come afterwards.
So will, sort of, the format would just be, what? How do you
Almost
want it
like
to
a
go?
public hearing, like, we've laid all this out and just get people's feedback on what they've heard to date, and, if they're comfortable in the direction we're moving, if there's things that they would really like to see in the code, that's their opportunity to bring us, things that they would like to see, and, just take that information in. I know we have a lot of information through the process of what we've gone through with the moratorium, but I think that information was really site-specific, whereas this is more town-wide.
Okay.
This was nice to go through each of the sections of the code, but we didn't get all the way through, so are we
Didn't
gonna,
get past
are you
So
gonna give
you
us
wanna
like a
have
red
an-
line version of what we got through?
Sure, I
And
am.
then pick it up from there?
Sure can. Yeah. Does anybody have anything that jumps out at them right now that you want to discuss, or
Well,
we're
what
good for
Ryan
now?
just said about the on-site containment and insurance, those are important to put in there.
Yeah, and the thing that Gary mentioned about the ongoing training.
I mean, I think, honestly, I think that's a good piece of homework between now and, if we set ourselves a date of like, it's the 7th, give us till like the 15th for people on the panel to look at it and put in their suggestions, or, you know what I mean? And then put that all kind of together, and
Yeah. Sounds good.
Then we'll have another robust discussion
Okay.
of the revised plan.
And we can sort of drill down on those maps and put those critical things on there, like hospital.
We can certainly start
school.
eliminating some spots that
You
we
want
know and
us
just.
to kind of get a little,
Yeah, I
like,
thought-
put those potential setbacks, like, well, at 300 feet, this knocks out 4 parcels at,
Yeah.
100 feet, you can still do it, or at
Yes.
750 feet, forget it. We
This is
can-
important, yeah, and this was a really good exercise to see the map of where they would be allowed now, and then if we take out the residential, so maybe we could blow it up and say, if it's just the LI 40,
We
but
did,
we
and then
have
if
the
you flip the page,
setbacks.
now you're on the specific sites. Those areas are those
Yeah.
plot places on the map. So now you can, then we can
But
start
with
to,
with the setbacks that we were
and then
just
we can
talking
add the
about,
setbacks.
We can add the setbacks and see which one are immediately eliminated, and then we'll be left with
Two spots.
Yeah. You're gonna have to
hopefully
put
a few spots.
yeah.
Two whole spots.
But we don't need many.
Yeah.
Right.
Which you
Alright.
have to be mindful of the coastal evacuation route, the hospitals, the schools, the residences.
And the public can weigh in too and say, well, I don't know how you got this spot. This is critical to everyone in the community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we can be like, oops.
Seth, you also might want to keep in mind where the light
Not
substations
there.
are right now.
Right.
Because like you said, you put
Absolutely.
these in, you
Well, I
put
think
these
it'll
in,
make-
if there's
I
not a
think it'll- I
substation
think
nearby, you're gonna have to build one.
Right.
Gary, what's the distance from one of these facilities to a substation that is most ideal for you guys?
2 inches.
The closest,
Yeah,
the
closest.
closer the better. is
I
right.
always heard less than 4,000 feet for some reason. Is that a real thing?
He had to go.
I don't know that he's on there.
Oh, he's here.
4,000
Oh,
feet number, but the closer the better, right?
is there a distance that you look at?
Within the substation or adjacent to it, but, yeah.
You
it's
have those
further
maps, right?
away it is,
Yes.
The more upgrades are usually required.
Is there ever a time when someone would want to build another substation?
Yeah, all the time.
But that's in the realm of above 10 megawatts. We're not doing that on a lower
No.
scale, right?
Yeah, I mean, we may get there on the South Fork, and that's someone asked before about population growth. We haven't seen population growth, but the South Fork is the one part of Long Island that's seeing electrical load growth at a rate that outstrips the rest of the island. Which is good in one way, but it's also concerning from us because it's a hard place to put new infrastructure. It's a hard place to put new substations, and so, it's a big concern for us, over say the next couple of decades.
Would you like to join us on Wednesday, May 22nd? You can join via Zoom if you want. Okay.
I just think, honestly, I think by saying that anything over 10 is gonna be a type 1 action, and it's gonna go to the town board, and there's gonna be this whole oversight process that currently we didn't have, is to me, a huge plus on the residents' part, because it's saying that, we're gonna go through all of the mitigation issues, and we're gonna go through, and it's not an as-of-right thing anymore. It's, if we're saying no residential, it's going to the town board, and it's a type 1 action, I think that takes a lot of people's fears, it mitigates a lot of it, because you're handling these in the serious nature in which they need to be handled.
Sounds good.
And if you give enough time for the fire code to catch up to us, then all of them will have to go through more of a rigorous hazard
Yeah.
mitigation process. It's just that code hasn't caught up.
Right. There'll be a point where we're, worrying about hydrogen fuel cells instead of this. And batteries are like easy, but we have to catch up to where we are.
Gary, have you actually looked at I was just reading an article about the compressed air energy storage, and it's underwater, so they put them near the wind turbines. And it's,
Yeah, that's, compressed air energy storage has been around for a long time. There's a couple of operating systems, big ones in the United States. I think one is down in Alabama. And they were always built with giant pipes underground, where compressed air would sit. It tends to be less economic than batteries. That's the issue.
But with land costs on the South Fork,
I know.
the water might be cheaper.
The article says it's cheaper. Cheapest way to stabilize renewable grids over longer timescales. Well, something to think about. Put them right out there with the wind turbines, underwater. No one will see them.
Poor
No
fishermen.
fire. Oh, no, the whales. So we're gonna all attempt to get some comments to Janice and Seth by the 15th.
That
Yep.
would be great.
I mean, I figured this way we can take what we put in today instead of making Seth try to digest all this and
Yeah.
give you a
Like you don't even have to.
typed up notes as to what our input was and.
That's great. I think that's
what-
fine.
if we-
That
We'll
would be
try to,
excellent.
you know, lay it out a little better as far as the tiering system goes. Take a look at the cell tower code, how we did it for that one, and try to mimic that to the extent
Okay.
that it makes sense.
Based on some megawatt, an understanding of the megawatts that we can all relate to and say,
Yeah.
okay, that makes sense. It's
Well,
not just.
yeah.
Because there were
it's-
some people that were like, well, wait a second, is it, you know, is 600 kilowatts, 100 megawatts? I was like, no, it was just confusing people
It
to
is
talk in two
confusing.
different units and it's
Absolutely.
just easier this way.
Absolutely, I like just starting at one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, anybody? Give a
That's
chat.
good. Good meeting.